Welcome to the Fowl Front Podcast, a part of the Waypoint Outdoor Collective. I'm your host, Ben Page, and this is your source for hunting, outdoors, and conservation conversations. In an eclectic and sometimes unorganized fashion, I appreciate you coming by. All right, welcome to the Fowl Front Waterfowl Podcast. This week, I'm joined by Ben O'Brien, host of the Hunting Collective podcast, powered by MeatEater, a Bozeman conversationalist, author, writer, hunting director at MeatEater, backcountry hunter and angler, chairman, hunter, husband, dad, and a White Claw enthusiast. How'd I do there, Ben?
That's a really good intro. I like it. I seem to have really glommed onto the White Claw thing.
Yeah.
I probably get more White Claw memes in the DMs of my Instagram than anybody in the history of the world.
Yeah. Now, do you actually like White Claw, or are you being paid by some sort of green decoy company or something like that?
You know, I started drinking it as a joke because people like to call me a hipster, and I like to lean into these types of things. So I started drinking it as a joke, and then one night I discovered that I enjoyed it, and so I just kept drinking it, and I leaned further into the joke, and now it's taken on a mind of its own, as things tend to do.
Of course. So new to Bozeman, right?
Yeah, brand new to Bozeman, really. We've been here about 10 months. I was lured here by the new MeatEater Incorporated team when they were starting the company, and was happy to make the trek. We were in Austin, Texas, and I don't know if you could pick two more different towns than Austin and Bozeman, but they're both pretty cool. And this one is my favorite so far. So I imagine I'll stay here until they kick me out.
Yeah, your wife and kid, they like the area?
They love it, man. Yeah, it's a family-friendly area. You know, we're looking to grow our family, and my wife and son both love to go outside, and they both, love unfortunately, they don't love the cold weather, but this time of year the weather's beautiful, so we enjoy it when we can. But it's a good place to be. I have zero complaints. Any complaints I do have are first world complaints, so I try to keep those to myself.
Good. So what do you do in your free time as far as hobby wise? And you can't say hunting, fishing, or shooting.
Yeah. Well, nowadays I used to have other hobbies. Nowadays it's mostly just the things you said and being with my family. Those are about all that I have time for. But I will say, like, coming up, I was a huge sports fan. My whole family were big baseball fans, big football fans, Ravens, Orioles, Redskins, from where I grew up in Maryland. So we were big sports fans. So I find that when I can find the time nowadays, I'll get in, an hour or two on the couch to watch a baseball game. Or I do also I will admit, playing fantasy football with my friends from back home because they love it, and I like to stay connected to those guys. So we do that. That's about all the free time I get anymore. A few hours a week, maybe, if I'm lucky.
Yeah, I hear you. All right. How did you get into hunting? What's that story arc right there?
Well, I imagine it's pretty common. You know, on my podcast, we talk to a lot of people from a lot of different walks of life, and I'm lucky enough to be connected with those folks. So I've heard lots of stories. Mine, I imagine, is fairly typical. You know, my dad was a hunter throughout his youth and into his 20s and 30s. And then when he had my brother and myself, he kind of got away from hunting, as I think a lot of parents do when you're a 9-to-5er and you have kids. You need to be home on the weekends. You need to be home in the evening. So hunting is hard to get in there. And my dad, during probably the first 10 or 12 years of my life, didn't do much hunting. But lucky enough for me, we had a neighbor by the name of Bill Miller who was really into hunting and kind of showed me what it was all about first time. And then I went back to my dad and said, I want to do this. This looks awesome. And so he happily jumped right back in it with me. And we spent, I think I killed my first deer when I was 12, and we probably spent the next 10 years hunting together around Maryland. It was pretty damn redneck. I mean, we shot whatever had antlers, if a spike, a 4-point, whatever it was, that was fine with us. And we had skinning parties in the garage. We fried backstrap. That's what we did. And
I feel like every neighborhood, if they don't have one, which is I think common, but needs a Bill Miller. That is such a
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Bill Miller is one of the greatest people in my life. He is. I always call him the ultimate redneck. I mean, the dude wore buckskins. When I was a kid, he took me to muzzleloader shoots. We would go to turkey shoots when I was a little kid. I'd be loading up like a 50 cal Hawkins, shooting at targets, trying to win a frozen turkey. I mean, we threw hatchets at old stumps. I mean, he kind of just was that guy in our neighborhood. And I don't know if all the parents liked him, but all the kids liked him.
I was going to say, did he have his own kids?
Yeah, he had a daughter, but no sons. And so I was like his de facto son. And
Right.
we rebuilt an old CJ7 together, drove that Jeep around. We camped, we fished. You know, my dad was always there with us. So we were a good trio. And I always like to say, like, my best friends were two 50-year-old dudes. I was like 14 and 15, but we had a good time.
That's awesome. Okay, so, kill your first deer at 12. Obviously, you go through high school, you wind up in a college somewhere, right?
Yes. I went to college in Maryland, a little town called Frederick, Maryland, which was about half an hour away from my hometown, man. And I didn't at the time. I was going to be a guy that never left home. I mean, I think at that time I felt like I loved my family, I loved my life. It was just kind of where I always was going to be in Hagerstown, Maryland. But started going to college. Went to college at this little. It was an all girls school. Like 5 years before I went there.
Okay.
It was called Hood College, and I was like probably playing the numbers at that point. But also they had a good journalism school, and that's what I wanted to do. So I jumped in there and went for it. I worked full time while I was there. Took a bunch of credits. That was a pretty crazy time in life, and somehow got out of there with a good GPA and a good resume to get the next job.
Two things on that. What motivates a young man to want to be a journalist?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think at the time, I wanted to. I remember wanting to be a writer early on in my life. I remember there was an outdoor writing school in Canada, and I couldn't afford to take the classes, but I just like pestered the quote unquote professor about, and I would send him stories and write things, and then he would write me back, and we had an interesting relationship. And I just remember that must have been 14 or 15 years old. So I just remember being interested in writing and reading and wanting to do that for a living. And then, early on, I think knowing what my passions were, which were sports and hunting, I knew I wanted to write about one of those things. And so I started to do things like I must have listened to every Orioles game on the radio and read every Orioles article I could get my hands on, similar with hunting. And so it's a weird foreshadow to what I do now, which is write about and talk about things that you love. So I think I cued in on that pretty early on in my life that I love to write, and that there was other things, hobby type things in my life that I loved. And if I could connect those, I'd be a pretty happy dude. So I'm glad that I'm glad that I went that way.
Awesome. The second thing I wanted to ask is what's up with Maryland's flag?
How so?
I don't know. It just seems so gaudy, or something of that nature. And also, when I think of Maryland, I do not think of rednecks. So that's I'll have to put that on my.
I can't really. I don't know that I could explain Maryland's flag all that well. Although that there's a lot of dudes that I know that have like full T-shirts that are just like the flag colors, and it is gaudy. I'll give you that. A lot of Maryland flag tattoos where I come from, but there's kind of two sides of Maryland. There's the Western Maryland side, which is where I come from, and my wife comes from Eastern Maryland, which is more of what everybody thinks of: Blue Crabs, Chesapeake Bay, Baltimore, Annapolis, Naval Academy. It's just a kind of a different culture there. But where I came from is just kind of the panhandle of Maryland. We were 10 minutes from Pennsylvania, 20 minutes from West Virginia. I always jokingly call it East West Virginia, where I grew up. We could drive to Virginia in 5 minutes, 10 minutes. So kind of just in that little sliver of Maryland that stretches in toward Appalachia. And it was pretty least my version of it, we lived in suburbia, but we were properly redneck. And it's still that way when I go back there. So I like it.
Excellent. Now, the next thing that I could, drum up about you is that you then worked for Yeti after that. Now, is there any space that you'd like to talk about between college and Yeti?
Yeah, lots of space in there. Lots of space. I came out of college working for the NRA, matter of fact, and got a job. I actually got a job. I was going to be a sports writer. Got a job pretty quickly at the Washington Post as a sports writer, and then another smaller magazine in Baltimore, and decided that my dream job of being a sports writer was terrible, and that all I was going to get to do was watch other people do things and write about that, and that wasn't what I wanted to do. It was pretty depressing at the time because I was gonna, my dream was to be a sports writer. So I ditched that dream and had a buddy that was working at the NRA at American Hunter magazine. He quit to go to work at Under Armour. I ran into him at a bar and he goes, "Hey man, you could be a hunting writer. That'd be cool." And I think at the time I was like, I don't know that that's a thing. I wasn't aware people did that for a job. And lucky enough, he put me in. I put my resume in and got the job, and ended up working for the website for American Hunter at the NRA for about 3.5-4 years, and did a bunch of writing, wrote for the print magazine, traveled out west, did a bunch of hunting, kind of discovered that there was a career out there in the hunting industry for me. And that was kind of my first break in the industry at the NRA.
Awesome. Okay. So then you switch over to Yeti. And you worked for that. How long did you work for them?
It would have been about 3.5 years in total. Yeah, I was one of their, I don't want to say early employees, but like around employee number 100. I was there for about 3.5 years. And by the time I was gone, there was 500 employees or so there. So quite a run.
Yeah. In all that time, writing for the NRA and then Yeti, what are some of the most memorable experiences and places that you went for your job there? Yeah. I've had quite a lucky, 12 years or decade or how long ever it's been that I've been doing what I've been doing. I've done, particularly at Yeti, but also at the NRA and other places I've been, done some amazing things. I think I've hunted every province in Canada but one. I've hunted, man, I just don't want to, surprise sounds douchey to list them all off, but I would say one of the better experiences I've ever had was in Nepal, hunting blue sheep. It had been about 2.5 years ago now for a Yeti film that we came out with on a hunting guy named Cole Kramer, who's a good buddy of mine. We went over to the Himalayas and trekked into western Nepal, which is pretty untouched, into a region called the Rakum region, which really doesn't see a whole lot of Westerners, unlike Everest. And the story there is crazy. It'd take me a long time to tell it, but it was, to say that was my job at the time, still kind of shocks me. And so we did some other pretty big films at Yeti, including going up to the Northwest Territories on a sheep hunt with Ike and Guy Eastman, kind of chasing their grandfather's legacy. I think that'll be a Yeti film coming up sometime this fall. So did some amazing things while I was there, but it was a very good run for that time in my life. Nice. So now, which one came first, the Hunting Collective or MeatEater for you?
The Hunting Collective came first. That's something that stretches all the way back about 5 years, and probably illustrates some of my laziness or maybe a lack of gumption when it comes to starting a podcast. I was on a hunt with Joe Rogan in British Columbia about 5 or 6 years ago, and he had a podcast. Well, I worked for a magazine. I thought magazines were the only thing that mattered. He started telling me all about podcasts and that I should do one, and I said I would, and came up with the Hunting Collective, and then 3 or 4 years went by, and I was working my butt off at Yeti and doing a bunch of other things, just never quite got it off the ground. But I would say about 6 months before Ranella called me to ask me to join up with MeatEater, I had already kind of recorded some things and had designed everything about the hunting collective that I wanted to do. And then when he started to describe the company that he wanted to start, I figured why not go ahead and launch the hunting collective and launch it with Steve as the first guest and see where that took us if I did join MeatEater. So, I mean, they were very close, maybe like 6 months with each other. But I did have, probably about 15 or 18 episodes in the can prior to actually officially joining MeatEater.
Yeah, I remember listening to your first episode, and I remember thinking, who is this? Who is this guy? And then I didn't even really, to be honest with you, I was just in my research portion of, starting my own podcast. And I was like, okay, who's this Steven Ranella guy? Who is this Ben O'Brien guy? I had, kind of no clue there and hadn't really done any research to that point. But so after all that, just to say, I'm sure you'll be nominated for some sort of communication awards coming up here this next year. But how does it feel to have the longest running streak at number one over at the prestigious Fowl Front Waterfowl Podcast Review?
It feels great. I got to say, I mean, I saw this coming. It's something that I knew I would, I really knew I would achieve over the years. I'm really proud to have achieved it so quickly and then keep it so consistently. So I'm really just want to congratulate myself. I mean, I'm doing great.
Yeah, no, you really did. Like for 5 weeks in a row there, people were like, hey, stop putting him at number one. I said, I can't. It's so good. Talking, some of the stuff that you've been doing at the Hunting Collective, I think is it's exactly what we need. And so I was going to ask you, what's your goal and what's your message? What is the Hunting Collective?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to explain and it's always moving, but I think when I started, I had this idea of what it needed to be, and that's morphed over time, and as everything should, I imagine. But it always comes back to people have said that people have called me a philosopher. That is not close to what I am, and that is an insult to all real philosophers out there. But there was a time in my life and that I was around a lot of non-hunters for the first time. And that was in Austin, Texas, when I was working for Yeti. And I was around a lot, and I was the hunting guy at Yeti. And there was lots of people in my life who didn't do what I did and were asking very blunt and obvious questions about hunting that I had never considered before. Very, germane questions to what we do, but something that if you're in a hunting, kind of an insular hunting space like I was at the NRA or other places I've been, you should never ask yourself those things. And I became kind of like the guy at the cocktail party that people would send other folks to if they had a problem with hunting. And so over that time, I realized that one, I needed to be better at explaining what hunting was to me, why I did it. And then knowing all the folks that I've known in the industry and having all the great conversations I've had, I was like, well, I'm having this conversation on a weekly basis with my friends and colleagues. Why not, put those two things together? So I imagine if you asked me what it was just exploring the why of hunting, but it's also just, it's part of just my personality to have fun and be random and just and react to things as they happen. So I imagine that's baked into the DNA of the podcast, but I really just want to find out why it is that I do this and why it is that I love it so much, so I can better explain it to other people.
Awesome. Yeah, because I was going to, what prompted you to go out and talk to an animal rights activist? I understand the, going out and talking to, what was the professor's name?
Robert C. Jones. Yeah,
absolutely. So I can see, entering the discourse ring with somebody who has a responsible, communication boundaries. And I was like curious, like what motivated you, or how'd you stumble into finding the animal rights activism person?
Yeah, I mean, we did a MeatEater live podcast in Sacramento this year. It would have been in like February. And there was a group called Anonymous for the Voiceless there to protest our MeatEater Live podcast. And Ryan Callahan and I were, prior to the show, decided we would go out and talk to these folks. I mean, they were standing in front of our show with the audience was piling in, and they were in V for Vendetta masks, holding TV screens showing factory farm like slaughter and things. And so we went out and talked to the folks, and we realized that they were animal rights activists, but they had really nothing. They just were looking at MeatEater, the name, and protesting that. And we got to talking, and I told the guy that was there outside, I said, listen, man, we're all basically on the same side here. and
our ends are the same or similar.
Yeah, I was like, I don't like factory farms. I don't like whatever's on your TV screen there. I'm not into it either. I don't know what you're expecting to hear out of me, like defending that that's there. And so that really that interaction kind of spurred me to think of like, I need to talk to these people and understand them. And I think that's a bedrock of not only, our community of hunters, or at least it should be, but it's a extension of our humanity to reach out and have a dialogue, constructive if it can be, with people we don't agree with. So I just went in search with in mind that I was going to Berkeley to talk to some other folks that there were. I'm sure there'll be an animal rights person hanging around Berkeley I can talk to. And so I started looking at what groups were legitimate enough and had done enough that I felt that they could really add to the conversation. And so we found Direct Action Everywhere and connected with them, and they connected me with their press coordinator, their spokesman, Matt Johnson. And then we decided to sit down and chat. And throughout that entire experience, he was a nice guy, a great guy, and we had lots of good conversations. When it came to the actual podcast and talking about what he believed, I felt like there was a lot there for me to just be frustrated and angry about. But there was also some stuff there that showed some light at the end of his kind of ideological tunnel. But I was glad to have done it, because I think it's very important to challenge ourselves in this day and age where we like to retreat to our ideological corners and kind of believe only in one thing and follow one through line with our lives. I think that is incredibly counterproductive. And so I was glad to have done that. It was challenging. I'll admit to, being stressed out and scared at some points about what it was going to come out to be. But it turned out, I think, to be productive.
Yeah, I appreciate it because my brother, who is actually a philosopher, he has a degree in it, and I would think anybody that knows him would call him that as well. And then my sister-in-law, she is I would say pretty devout vegan. And so my brother practices vegetarianism. Unless I'm in town, then he'll go get a burger with me. And so the conversations that I always have with them about hunting, I always thought is something that needs to be kind of in the public discourse and rhetoric. And so I appreciated seeing that on your guys's on your show there. So now you guys at the MeatEater, at the Hunting Collective, you guys talk a lot about big game, I'd say, primarily. And but I know that you do dabble in a little bit of waterfowl hunting, and I would be, I think, off topic probably if I didn't mention or ask you any waterfowl questions on a waterfowl hunting podcast.
Sure.
So my first question is so where's the waterfowl content on MeatEater?
Yeah, that's something, as the director of hunting, that's something that I'm very keen on. We are actively looking around for ways to jump in that in a way that, makes sense for us. And as we grow as a brand from from really Steve Rinella and Steve Rinella's ship into a larger platform, we gotta figure that out. We're pushing hard on fishing right now. And, people say it's funny how people say that, MeatEater itself is kind of like a Western big game thing. And there's, of course, elements to that. We live in Bozeman. That's kind of, that influence is laid bare. But, Steve has done a wonderful job in the past of covering small game and making that important. And we, beat the turkey hunting drum very, very loudly every year. Did so this year. And so I imagine, and I know there's at least one MeatEater episode this year that's waterfowl related. So I imagine once we get to in December this year, we are going to start discovering our way into the waterfowl space because it's something we love to do.
Yeah, who's the most avid waterfowler in the office?
Callahan can turn a bird, man. Like I've seen him. He can talk to just about any animal, so I give him that credit. But I would go with Callahan and Ranella are both pretty avid. It's just a time thing. We do it, rather than the hardcore whitetail or waterfowl guy that just goes after that single species. We kind of do it in kind of short periods of time when it suits our season, the seasonality of what we do. So, no, I don't think we have anybody here that's just full on waterfowl, but we're keeping our eyes and ears open to make sure we get those perspectives.
So now talking a little bit to, your duck hunting experience or goose hunting, I don't want to be selective there. But what's kind of your story in waterfowl hunting?
Yeah, growing up, we didn't do a whole lot of waterfowl hunting. I mean, we goose hunted probably once or twice a year in Maryland. Never did much duck hunting, but much like everything else in my life, when I entered the hunting industry and just discovered these abilities to travel and do these things and write about them, waterfowl has been, again, I kind of like every time I go duck hunting or goose hunting or crane hunting or whatever it might be, I find myself wishing that I could just do that. And every time I go whitetail hunting or elk hunting, I find myself wishing I could just do that and get really good at it. And so I think I feel about waterfowl hunting much like I feel about everything. If only I could just do that and focus on that. And so normally I think over the last decade, I get 2 or 3 or 4 duck hunts in a year, or waterfowl hunts, depending on what it is. So last year I didn't get any in just because of the move and coming out west and trying to figure out life rather than hunting. But this year I'll be on Maryland's Eastern Shore, hunting geese, probably hunting some sea ducks, some other things like that. So I mean, I'm jealous of the folks that get to and desire to only hunt a single species or really focus on it, because it's to see it as a craft, I think, is something that interests me.
Yeah, I always kind of go through this thing in the summer, like right about now. The season is over the horizon, and looking forward to it. And then I start thinking to myself, hey, I start looking at that bow hanging up in my gun rack, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to get after some whitetail this year, and that's all fine. And then as soon as birds start flying, or as soon as we get an open season for waterfowl, or the state north or south of me does, I find it very hard to be sitting in a tree stand or a ground blind when I could be out waterfowl hunting. So
it's great, man. I like I said, it's one of those things that every time I do it, I go, why don't I do this more every single time? And now I live quite close to the Gallatin River here, and there are more birds in this area than I ever thought there would be. So sure. I imagine when we roll out of deer season here and into waterfowl season this December, I will be chomping at the bit to get out and throw a few decoys in the river or whatever I got to do to kill a few ducks and then to eat them too. I mean, that's man, they're, pickled gizzards is a favorite around here and many other things, but just straight seared duck breast is well worth any trip.
Oh yeah. I didn't ever believe it until last year when somebody made me do this. I butterfly a big breast out, and just some olive oil and Montreal steak seasoning, 2 minutes on one side, 1 minute on the other. And that is the way to eat duck, I'll tell you.
Yeah, man. Sear it, but eat it rare. Yeah. No, I like you can leave the fat on it and the skin on it. It's a little tougher. You got to get skilled at leaving it crispy, but if you can master that, that's a good time. My wife at first was very skeptical of duck, and I think maybe 2 years ago, I went on a hunt with Tony Vandemore at Habitat Flats, and this was something that kind of disturbed me. I went there, not to down Habitat Flats. It's a great place, but a lot of the clients left their ducks behind. And so they were like, we have these ducks. I was like, well, I'll take every single duck I can fit in this Yeti cooler. And so I ended up with a pile of ducks in my freezer. And we ate a lot of duck that year, and it turned my wife and me around on what it was.
Isn't Tony a great guy? The first time, and I'm a nobody, and it took. I mean, I almost had to kick him off the phone because we were just talking about kids and getting them in the outdoors, and just a good guy. So
yeah, great dude. Yeah, I got to spend some time with him and his wife, and at the time she was pregnant with their second child. My wife was pregnant with our first child, I think, at the time, and he's just like, again, one of those guys that has built something. Just a good person, a good family man, all around, but has built something, has a vision for what Habitat Flats is. And, I admire that a lot. He's a classy dude and stand up individual. Somebody, really somebody to be admired within our world.
Yeah. What was your impression of his operation that he has down there?
We were doing a photo shoot for Yeti, and I only spent 2 days. It was one of those things where I wished I had spent more time down there in Habitat. I would say that, like, it's ambitious what they do. It's ambitious to pull in that many clients and to pull in that many birds. It's ambitious, and it's fast paced, and it's all, it's the engine is revved at all times. And Tony's like one of the only people that would be able to keep all those things rolling. We had 2 pretty good duck mornings there. Nothing amazing. I think we limited out one morning and then, shot a few ducks the second morning. But just, the way that the people that are there see him as kind of like the Michael Jordan duck hunting or whatever analogy you might use. It's cool. It's just cool to see that, and the way that people think of him, and he's earned it because he knows his stuff, man.
Now, I might ask you if you're brave enough here to do this. This is kind of a big one. But do you dare to tell me your impression of waterfowl hunting and waterfowl hunters, maybe in contrast to other hunting types or peoples?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I generally try to answer every question asked of me, so I can probably hit that one up. You know what? There's a big part of me that, like I said, when I think of waterfowl hunters, I think of the commitment it takes to be really good at it and really into it. Not only from a calling standpoint, but from just a time, energy, and money standpoint, what you have to put in. I mean, if you're nuts about snow geese, what you have to do to make that work, or if you're nuts about, this Canada geese or ducks or whatever, it doesn't matter. The amount of gear and time spent and the refining of the craft. I mean, I've hunted, like, I've done the boat races and public land in Arkansas where guys are just humming on public land and trying to find the proper hole in the timber and racing other guys and shouting and yelling and water splashing. And dogs are jumping in and out of boats. I mean, those things are, I always found waterfowl hunting to be hectic. So it takes somebody that's a little bit crazy to to jump straight into it. So I admire it, man. Every little niche within our hunting space has a stereotype. All of them do. And I've come to just love to run into a guy with all his stickers on his trailer and the big chaw in and like a fucking waterfowl vest on with the call and lanyard. Like, I love to run into that dude because that dude is a little bit crazy, and that makes for an interesting conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that differentiates, and I see this all the time, and I fully acknowledge this as my flaw in hunting, whether it be turkey hunting or whitetail hunting. You make a decision at some point. It's to cross the river there, or it's to get up and move after, at this time, to, sneak around this bush or sneak around that bush. And I've just found that I just get racked up with every single possibility that you can do. And then I'll always like beat myself up for like choosing the route that I did. If it didn't came in, it just always leaves me wondering. I've got this mind that's always ticking. And so I always found that waterfowl hunting is a little bit more forgiving in that sense, where, okay, well, that sucked. That group didn't do it. So let's change something real quick. And so I don't know if maybe you experienced that or not. But that's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah. I mean, duck hunting is, I mean, I'll be honest. Like I got a lot of buddies that like to go solo hunting and find a lot of value in like just being by themselves and going out in the mountains or wherever they are, sitting in a tree stand all day by yourself. I that's great. I like it, but I like being around people. You know, I like the communal nature of hunting a lot of times. So that's one thing about duck hunting that I enjoy. And like you said, I think it's a little more forgiving in the way that like you're all in a blind. If you get some birds working and somebody waves their gun barrel in the air, does something stupid, and they bust and roll out of there. I mean, there'll be some, if you're in a good spot, there'll be some more behind. But if there's a giant buck you've been chasing and he comes down the right trail and you do the wrong thing and he breaks out of there, there's a little more hopelessness where that's concerned. So I just think duck hunting is, I mean, you laugh more, you're with your people more, man. And so for those reasons, like I said, it hits me in those places. And like I said, having eaten almost all the waterfowl I can get my hands on, there's a lot to be said there too.
So you've done something that's, I think, unique and probably would be on most people's bucket list, and that's hunting with literally like the king of waterfowl, or the original duck commander himself. How long ago was that?
Boy, not long ago, like 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. It was like at the tail end of the duck commander.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people see the duck commander and they only see that side of it, especially us, the younger guys, the newer guys that weren't around for when Phil was actually, when he was turning the calls out in his shop behind his house and kind of growing that. And a lot of us just remember the TV series, and not talking about the VHSs, the Duckmen VHSs.
Oh yeah, man.
I
watched the Duckman VHSs. That shit was awesome. Like it was one of the coolest things there ever was.
Oh gosh, just so many. I remember those were at my grandpa's, his like fishing cabin that we had out there, and I remember not really understanding it when I was younger, but coming back now watching them online and stuff, and where you can find the clips, that's like the original hunting, YouTube.
Yeah. I found myself around the duck commander times arguing with people. They'd be like, we don't want to deal with those guys. They're just reality. I'm like, no, they're not. They're the best duck hunters that there are. They just happen to get really popular on reality TV, but they are the best. And they've been the best for about 2 decades now, maybe more. Phil, probably 3 decades.
Yeah.
And so, they got turned into cartoon characters on TV, and I mean, they did fine and profited off of it. And, many, many good things have come out of it for them. But I think in the duck hunting community, or even in the hunting community, I mean, some people thought that they lost their street cred when I can tell you they hunt every day of the season, every single day, TV show or no TV show. And so that's who they are. And it's they're every bit as duck hunting fanatics today as they ever were. And it's regardless of bobbleheads or not,
Yeah. How was that experience?
It was awesome. I mean, I got to know Jace pretty well over the years, and they, invited me to come down there, and another guy named Justin Martin, who's on their crew, become pretty close with him over the years too, and got to go down there, and they have it's funny enough, we got there, we got out of the truck, there's a bunch of duck hunters all assembled at the little dock where they let off, and there's like Kirk Cameron is standing there, and so I was more like starstruck by Kirk Cameron at the time. I'm like, Kirk Cameron, are you serious? What? And so I got over that, but then I got to sit next to Phil in a duck blind in between Phil and Cy for a good bit of the morning. And we shot some ducks in the morning, the first morning, and they're just ribbing each other like a family. You know, Jace is doing all the work and chiding Phil for not doing a damn thing, and Uncle Cy's sitting there, and these guys can shoot like a teal, a full, like a passing teal without even shoot its head off. And I can't even, I'm 10 feet behind it trying to catch up. And so to see those guys, what they do, how they talk. And that was in the morning, and then the afternoon they were going to film a bunch of stuff, and I got left just by myself with Phil Robertson duck hunting, just me and him in a blind. And I could probably talk for 3 hours about that experience. But he called in a mallard drake for me, and he called it in. It came in, it cupped up and came straight into the blind. He called it, almost to the water, called me, told me to stand up and shoot it. And I shot it, and he just looked over and he goes, "Smooth off." I was like, oh, he said it. He said it. He said the thing he says.
I mean, you're not the same person that you were entering that blind, I'm sure, coming out of it.
No, man. The best thing about that whole thing was we were sitting there and things were kind of dead in the afternoon. And I said, Phil, what's your favorite? Because I didn't know what to ask the guy. Like, what am I going to say to Phil Robertson? And so I just said, like, what's your favorite way to cook duck? And gumbo. And then for like an hour and a half, he went over, and then you cut the onions and you let it simmer for like an hour. And then you cut the celery and it simmers for another hour. And he told this story about gumbo that went on for so long that I forgot what we were even talking about. And so if you want to, if I could have recorded the 1 hour gumbo session that he gave me, I think we probably could have released that as a podcast. It would have been a good listen. But yeah, it was pretty cool. There's a photo that my buddy Sam Soholt took of me, Phil, me on the front of Phil's boat, Phil driving with his dog sitting beside me that I have framed in my house. It's a pretty special memory. I'm lucky to have had that time. That was, and if it never happens again, doesn't matter. That was, like you said, it's hard to be the same person you were after that.
That's a great story, Ben, but I think you really messed this up, because this whole time I've been thinking, what the hell was Mike Seaver or Kirk Cameron doing on a freaking in the marsh?
Well, Kirk Cameron was like friends with the Robertsons.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they're like close friends. And they met, I think, through probably church, would be my guess. But he was there, I think, with one of his family members, and he goes down and stays with the Robertsons for like a week every year in duck hunts. And he was just hanging out there. I just remember being like, what? What are we what are you doing here? I don't know if I was starstruck or just struck by the fact that Kirk Cameron was just hanging out, having a Mountain Dew.
Awesome. Well, what other, waterfowl have you chased in your day? What would you say is like your most, besides obviously those two that you've mentioned, the most memorable waterfowl hunt that you can remember?
Yeah, good question on that one. I've hunted the Great Salt Lake a couple years back. That was fun. That was a good time. Great Salt Lake's a very interesting place, interesting people. I would say I hunted crane, sandhill cranes a couple times in Lubbock, Texas. I found that to be, really interesting. The way that you set decoys. I mean, I shot turkey loads at these things, and you shoot them and they fold like lawn chairs and fall out of the sky. And, once you get an up close look at what a sandhill crane is, if you're like me, just fascinated with the bird and where it comes from. And then you get to taste them and you're like, well, okay, that makes it even better. So I think crane hunting just for the bird, I don't know that the actual hunting, like in an A-frame in the middle of a, Milo field in northern Texas is like the most exciting landscape, but the bird itself, was really cool. And then eating them. I don't know that I would agree that they're like the ribeye of the sky. I mean, the ones that I've eaten have been real good, but not like knock your socks off like some people describe. So I'll give it like the flank steak of the sky or something like that.
I think those people that are probably saying that it's the ribeye of the sky are going from like overcooking their mallards maybe to
maybe
eating crane. Being from Nebraska, where they're protected there in Nebraska, it's always been really weird to me that people did hunt cranes. Just because growing up, it's like, oh, you can't, don't even look at those cranes. And so I am actually, that's on my bucket list for next year. So I think I'm going to head down to Oklahoma or the Panhandle out there and get after that. But
yeah, it's fun, man. You'll have a great time doing it. And like I said, I mean, it just, I just remember like looking at a pile of cranes. Wow, that's not where I came from. Oh, that's cool. There was rarely ever a crane where I showed up on the East Coast growing up. So sometimes I found myself in those situations where you're doing something, you're enjoying yourself, and then you just get this moment of reflection, like, whoa, this is pretty amazing that I'm getting to do this. So I think sandhill cranes was one of those.
So now this will be a little bit non-linear here in the question asking, but it did strike me yesterday. You guys, Western hunting and all the type of stuff that you do, very physical. Is there, do you guys ever work? I never hear you guys talking about working out. And I feel like it's something that waterfowlers, they don't really, I don't know, you don't really have to work out too much to be a good waterfowl hunter. But it can definitely help in some cases. But I was just curious, what's the workout culture like over there?
We all do it. I would say that, Yanni, Giannis Patelis is probably our mountain hiker workout guy around here. But we all try to stay in shape. We all try to eat right when we can. We all try to maintain, through all of the challenges of work-life balance and those types of things. We all try to maintain. So we all understand. I mean, Ryan Callahan and I just went and shot a thing called the Vortex Challenge.
Yeah.
Last weekend, which is hot. It's like a 5 or 6 mile run through the, sagebrush country, Wyoming, some hiking, and then you shoot different stages. And we both felt like going into what we were talking about, man, we really haven't worked out enough going into this, but we got there and we were great. We did really good. And both crushing hills and we're happy with how we did. So I think we kind of underestimate the amount that we actually do here when it comes to working out. I think working out is like a hunting lifestyle is not something that we're into. We don't sit around and talk about, lifting or running, particularly for hunting. We just try to take care of ourselves and do everything that we can to be healthy. And then when it comes to season, start hiking as much as you possibly can and try to simulate, what hunting is as much as possible. So that's what we do. It's a good culture, man. We understand that this is all fun. All of it's fun. Every part of it should be fun. So the cool thing about since I moved here to Bozeman and all of us have come together and moved to the same town is we just have a ball every day, and hopefully it shows by the amount of silly things that we do. But we have fun with almost every aspect of it.
I think it was this morning or yesterday. I can't remember. Whenever your most recent podcast, where you were reading some mean comments, that I really, that resonates. It's so funny. You're sitting there and you put a lot of hard work and attention, and that's time away from your family, and I don't know. You just put a lot of yourself into the podcast and into the open air of public forum. And then there's just some dude just waiting to pounce and let you know. Yeah. And I just thought that
I was giggling like a little girl when we were doing that, because it's just so, once you read it like that, you just realize, one, it's just like that guy's right to say what he wants to say. I've never went online and left any kind of review like that, or probably never would. If I don't like something, I just don't listen to it. Right. But there's some people who just that's they want to let their opinions know. And I can tell you that I understand that when you're listening to a podcast and you don't agree with whatever's being said, that it gets frustrating, man, because you don't have any outlet to disagree with whatever's being said. You can't yell at the people talking.
Yeah, you're
through
like
your radio or whatever.
Yeah, you're handcuffed. Your mouth is tied up. Like you can't say anything. You're just screaming at your steering wheel.
You're like, you're wrong. Yeah, and you want to say those things, and so I get that. Some people just turn it off. Other people listen all the way through and then level that kind of stuff. But for me, I never thought my podcast anybody would listen to it. But, now that more people are starting to, I think that it just comes with the territory, and you can't build that into the way you see yourself or your self identity. Can't do it. I mean, it's just not something that, all the good comments, they mean just as much as all the bad ones. So you just kind of have to, internalize that and do the best with it that you can.
Yeah. Podcasting is such a strange, medium, because anybody can do it, which that's both good and bad. But it's just really weird that we have these hour and a half long conversations, that people are giving their time to you, when that's a lie. You can never, a person can make more money. A person can go get a new car, but they can't make any more time. And so they're giving you, it's kind of weird.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it's just it's that's why I try to understand that too. People are taking 2 hours a week to listen to me talk about things, and that's going to manifest itself in ways that I don't even understand. So you just kind of have to try to have some understanding of that interaction. It's new for me, new for the listener. There's going to be frustrations for them, and it just is how it's going to be. So you can't really hold that against somebody if they get upset at something I say, or they want to label me a certain way, good or bad. I mean, I think it's just part of the game. So it took me a while to get comfortable with that, but I'm obviously, by my mean comment reading on the show, I'm very comfortable with it now. I totally understand it, and I encourage it, because I think it's what it's all about at some level.
Yeah. Yeah. And just one comment about your show from my seat. I'm on the Phil train. I'm a fan of Phil.
Man, you're on the Phil train?
I
got
did
a lot
think,
of fans out there.
I did think he was like a 45-year-old man, though. I truly did.
You?
Yeah.
He has like that voice of a 45-year-old accountant type of voice.
Yeah.
For sure. And that's what I think Phil brings to the show. He just brings he knows nothing about hunting. Absolutely nothing.
Which is perfect.
I mean, not even nothing at all. It's
I imagine when you guys hired him, I imagine that his response was, really, or something.
Yeah, like, huh? Interesting. I'll do it. Yeah. No, and I never, when we hired him, he was just coming as our podcast engineer, and there's never any intention. But then I met him. I'm like, oh, dude, you're perfect. You're awesome. And so it's good to have somebody in the room to give perspective when I'm being less than effective with my reasoning. Phil's a good leveler for our show.
All right. As we wind down here, want to leave the people thinking about something. What are you most concerned about right now for our community of hunters and anglers and outdoors people?
Wait a minute. Phil just came in the room.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, Phil just came. Phil, do you want to guest star on the Fowl Front podcast? We were just talking about you. Sure. Phil, what do you think about waterfowl hunting?
I think it's incredibly underrated.
He thinks it's underrated, he said.
Phil, have you been?
All right. Well done, Phil.
Yeah.
So back to what the serious question you had. What was it?
What is the topic of concern for you right now? Like, what are you most concerned about for our community of hunters and anglers?
Yeah, there's a lot of things. I would say there's two main things. One of them, and I think I hate to speak for all hunters and anglers. I can speak for myself. I have a lot of experience within our community, and so I speak for myself. Two things I'm concerned about. One is the lack of knowledge of the history of what we do, from a conservation sense, particularly. It's not built into every hunter that you need to know this story. It just isn't. It's not on our, it's not in our rule books. It's not printed on a card for every hunter. It wasn't passed down to me as a child. I would guess that it's not passed down to most people, and it is an incredible story when it comes to wildlife and conservation. And if you really start to look at it, it is amazing. And what we have done as hunters is amazing. What we're part of now, what was set up for us, what we now steward into the future is freaking amazing. And it's around the world. It's one of the best systems to conserve wildlife and wild places that there is. And so, I wish it was taught in schools. I wish, more people understood what this really was, because the more I've dug into it over the last couple of years, the more I've been, jaw-droppingly amazed at the people and what they did and how long it's lasted and what kind of we have on our shoulders to keep going. And so I think that's one thing, one very important thing that we can all do is try to just understand the history of what we're a part of. That's very important. And then the second one would just be, as we were talking about earlier, embracing our differences and understanding that we need to have dialogues, and we can't just retreat into our corners when it comes to politics or even in the hunting community. Like, I'm a crossbow guy, you're a trad bow guy. I'm just retreating into our corners all the time to kind of only believe one thing and only hang around people that believe exactly what we believe and never challenge ourselves. I think that's dangerous too. So hopefully that's two important things, that a lot of things that I think about on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think we get a little caught up in not realizing that we are all in the very same small side of the bell curve when it comes to opinions on hunting, and that it's, the fights that we're having with each other are not important as so much, or with the other end of the bell curve, that might not be very important either, but it's everybody in the middle that is kind of apathetic. That's the real danger.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we, I always talk about how I think about hunting all the time. It's something that my life is kind of consumed with, and I just don't, like, part of me is like, I don't understand why everybody else doesn't feel the same way I feel. Because if they just did it the way that I did it, they would feel that way. And so, you gotta have to fight that urge and say, okay, there are a lot of people coming from a lot of different angles, and to understand, to be real corny about it. That's why I call my podcast, The Hunting Collective, because I just think that understanding everyone's perspective, the collective perspective, one by one, podcast by podcast, if we were able to understand perspectives that we didn't understand before, then that'll give us a better chance to, understand why we're doing what we're doing, if we can compare it to other people, other interesting folks. So I think that's what I've tried to do, and try to have fun along the way.
Last thing I got, what can we be looking forward from your end of things over here? What's on the horizon?
Yeah, man. You know what? I'm trying to take that vegan/hunter conversation on the road. I really want to take that to theaters and have that conversation and have Q&As around it, and really just bring that kind of conversation out to the light. I think of all the things I've done within the podcast space, at least, that's been the one that really, I think, hit people over the head the most. And I spent a lot of time over the last weeks talking about it. I try to answer every email and every DM and every comment I can. And I spent a lot of time thinking and talking about it. And I think it hits home with people that it's a very important thing. So we're going to try to take that on the road to a theater near you if we can. We'll see how that works. So that's in the plans. But then hunting season. Then got an antelope hunt next week, and then elk season in Montana.
Is that what you got up first? Is antelope?
Yep, next week in Wyoming, antelope with a bow, and then this will be my first September as a resident elk hunter in Montana. So I imagine I'll enjoy that immensely, and then a bunch of other stuff this fall that'll be filmed for the MeatEater YouTube channel, and film for other things. So it'd be fun, man. It's fun I get to live my dream. I'm grateful for it, man. It's a fun thing.
Awesome. Well, hey, I appreciate you for everything, especially with the connection with Phil there. That was great. And we got Ben O'Brien, the Hunting Collective, out of the MeatEater, the hunting director at MeatEater. And what do you got for a final comment for the listeners of the Fowl Front, Ben?
Keep doing what you're doing. If you're listening to this, you're so hardcore into waterfowl that you are listening to dudes talk about it for hours on end. That's a good sign, I feel. I feel it's a good sign for your personality and what you feel like is important. So keep doing it.
All right, Ben. Hey, appreciate it a lot.
All right, Steve Ranella just walked in. He's kicking me out. Oh, okay.
We were going to go on
All right.
a little fight for it.